one aspect to obedience that we just don't think about is the fear of the Lord and how much that it really impacts our obedience. Now, when I talk about the fear of the Lord, um, most people who listen to me preach or me talk, I very much always go to 1 John 4:8, where it talks about how perfect love casts out all fear. But if you continue, it says that for for fear has to do with punishment. John Bevere brings up this amazing point about the difference between being scared of God and having the fear of the Lord. And he says that someone who is scared of God wants to hide from God, right? And so it's that aspect. So when we look at Adam, when he ate from the fruit, he hid from God. He had something to hide from God. But the fear of the Lord, it comes, I believe that it comes from truly understanding, like the more you really understand God and the weight and the implications of what it means that God is God, it has to produce an awe, a fear of Him. You can't stand idly by if you truly understand, not as like a philosophical exercise, but as truth, as a reality. If you see God, if you understand that God is all knowing, all powerful, that should put a fear in you. That should put a type of respect that sets you straight. I had this series that I I went through the encounters of God, and all of them, bar none, every example in the Bible of an encounter with God, there is fear and trembling. I think about Isaiah, where he was a prophet for the first 5 chapters of his book. And then from the 6th chapter, he has his first real encounter with God. And the first thing he says is, like, I am not worthy. My lips are dirty. And he says this, and people will say, oh, well, he was a sailor and he cussed and this and that. He was a prophet, a holy prophet that says that his mouth was not good enough to proclaim the goodness of the God that he sees before him. There is, I think of Peter during the transfiguration, where he sees Jesus in all his glory, and the only reaction he has is, do you want me to make some tents? Which I think is insane. He sees Jesus in all his glory. He sees Moses, and then he sees, I think, Elijah by his side, and he's dumbfounded. And that's his response. What comes out of fear of the Lord is humility. And think about this. If you understand that we are all created in the image of God and we are all children of God, you'll think twice before disrespecting a fellow human being, regardless of what they believe and this and that, because regardless of how they're acting, they are God's creation. They are God's. And I know there might be some debate on God's children, and I understand that. But regardless of whether they are children, they are creation, they're God's creation that deserves the utmost respect. And the Bible talks about how we are all created with His dignity. And so if you feared the Lord, you wouldn't say egregious things to people. You wouldn't despise people for how they're acting and this and that. This kind of obedience and this kind of fear leads to the separation of sin and sinners. And I know this was like a huge phrase, like, I love the sinner, but I don't love the sin and this and that. And I think it's really hard for people to articulate and compartmentalize this because they don't love the sinner enough. Because the thing is, like, maybe I haven't talked about jealousy, but jealousy is a beautiful function of love. Jealousy says that I hate anything that threatens the things that I love and the things that belong to me. This is jealousy. Envy is desiring what someone else has. Jealousy is protecting what I have, right? When moms go mama bear for their kids and they lift or push cars out of the way and this and that. I don't know if you've ever heard of stories like that, but that happens every once in a while. Or, parents do these crazy things to save their kids. That's out of jealousy. I will not let this thing take my child away from me. And so when you think about God, the all-powerful, the all-knowing, the omnibenevolent, the all-good God, with full force, hating the thing that separates you from him. Okay, well, if we have that kind of vision about what sin is, it's not that it's morally wrong, it's not anything other than the fact that it separates us from God. That is the core of hating sin. And the only way to hate sin is to proportionally love people and to proportionally love sinners. You can't, if you hate sin without loving people proportionally, then you're just a moralist. You just believe in right and wrong, and you have your own idea of what right and wrong is, because what I've explained is the only way to hate wrong. If you don't have that filter, you're just bigoted, you're just self-righteous. And so that holy fear of God could lead you to hate sin and love people so much that you walk in line of how God wants us to treat sin. And if we understand sin in such a way, and we fear God, that he hates sin in such a deep way, we wouldn't flirt with sin. We wouldn't flirt with this idea of this thing can take me away from God. We would be so terrified of leaving his presence, of being apart from him, that we would then not have an exception and not make excuses for our sin, but we would get rid of it. So that this is another thing that we don't think about enough. The fear of the Lord. John Bevere has a book about it. It's phenomenal. It makes me want to give my life to Jesus all over again. And every time I read it, I will have the same feeling because it's so powerful. John Piper has extensive videos on this on YouTube. John Piper is a phenomenal resource. I look at how many views he gets and I cry because he talks literally about everything. He's been just Q&As for 40, 50 years or something. And so he's answered everything under the umbrella of questions that we would have. And so I urge you guys, fear God. Obedience can come out of love. It can come out of respect. But ultimately, if you do not have the fear of the Lord, you're not going to be wise. You're not going to obey when it hurts. You're not going to obey when you're confused. You're not going to obey. And another thing, I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but if the fear of the Lord isn't the primal fear that you have, then it's going to be overtaken by another fear. Fear of pleasing people, fear of insecurity, fear of, and I mean insecurity by financial, emotional, whatever the case is. Fears guide us. Fears, it's the yin and yang of our desires. The fears and the desires that we have drive our path. And if they both do not point to God, we're going to have a hard time walking to God. So have the fear of the Lord. and obviously have God as our first love as well. Yeah, I think this is how he becomes our everything. And that's so important because life gets so clouded and confusing, and God cannot be our North Star if he's not both of those things, if he's not our deepest fear and our greatest desire. So just think about that and meditate on what that looks like. Go research, go watch videos, just Google it, fear of the Lord. Just try to find these things. That book, again, Fear of the Lord by John Bevere, it's phenomenal. And it's very wholesome. He goes through all of it. His sermon on it is great too. I just finished it, actually. That's kind of why I'm updating this obedience podcast. Just think about it. Have a good day.